Good evening and welcome to this special Barbican online event. My name is Sonia Zadurian and I'm one of the cinema curators at the Centre. I'm so thrilled to be welcoming you this evening to this screen talk for Sisters with Transistors with director Lisa Rovner and engineer and sound designer Marta Salogni, hosted by Zing Tsjeng. We launched our cinema on demand streaming service last summer and have been so delighted with the response from our audience. And I'm so pleased to say that Sisters with Transistors is just one of the fantastic films we have available to stream right now. At the Barbican Centre, we regularly hold screen talks as part of our new release programme. And it's really great to be able to replicate this online while we're temporarily closed. I'd like to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to the team at Modern Films, our partners at Dock and Roll, and of course to our speakers this evening for making this event possible. Our cinemas are due to reopen on Monday the 17th of May with new release Oscar winners Nomadland and Sound of Metal, Tina, a critically acclaimed documentary on the life and work of Tina Turner, and Pedro Almodovar's The Human Voice, plus recorded Q&A with Almodovar and star Tilda Swinton, hosted by Mark Kermode. And I know that I speak for the whole cinema team when I say that we cannot wait to welcome you back. But now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Zing for this evening's discussion. Over to Zing.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Good evening and welcome to the Barbican Centre's virtual screen talk and for Sisters with Transistors, the new documentary from director Lisa Rovner. So it is an absolutely astonishing film about the untold female pioneers of electronic music. But you already knew that because otherwise you wouldn't be watching this panel. And we are very lucky to be joined by the director herself, Lisa, and Marta Salogni, the sound director on film. Lisa is an artist and filmmaker based in London who has collaborated with everyone from Margiela and Acne, and this is her first feature film. Marta was born in Italy and has worked with everyone from Bjork to MIA as a producer, mixer, and engineer. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So I want to talk about the genesis of Sisters with Transistors first. What was the initial inspiration for the film, Lisa?
Yeah, well, it all starts with a timeline of, this alternative history to electronic music. And I think the thing that really grabbed me was the images, these women and their machines. That was kind of what initially piqued my interest. And then, of course, discovering their sound, and then later discovering just how enabling this new technology had been, that the idea that being a woman composer at the time was controversial, and these machines really enabled these women to get their music out to a wider audience. So I think it's the images really pulled me in, then the sound really grabbed me, and then the kind of bigger themes of the film.
Right, and the images are just completely out of this world because you see these women in kind of 30s, 40s, kind of prim twin sets and pearls, but they're making this incredibly modern sounding music. Where did you first come across these kind of images?
Well, the research was very long, so there were some things online that made me realize, okay, this could make a film. But the archive comes from really literally all over the world.
And what about you, Marta? How did you get involved with the documentary?
I think Lisa and I met at the playback for a project I was doing called Incolab. And that's a project that is started thanks to Katya Isakov from Women Produce Music. And it had me, Katya, Susan Chani, all collaborating together along with Anil as well, another artist. And so during the playback of this project, in which we were in the studio all together, we started recording in kind of like improvised but also composed way, half and half. And the playback, I met Lisa, and Lisa briefly told me about the film that she was working on, and then we met again and again and kept talking about it. And to me, it just sounded extremely fascinating to finally, meet someone who was about to make a film that involved all the heroes of mine. Literally every single woman listed in the film is someone who I look up to, and has been a reason for inspiration and hope for me during my career, both at the beginning and still now. And thanks to Lisa, I've also discovered more role models that I can look up to in the future. So that's I think how we met. It was I was very lucky to meet her.
Yeah, Marta was kind of hanging out. I mean, it was just I've never been to a playback before for a record, and it was just so awesome in every single way. But Marta was kind of behind like this massive mixing desk, and she just really exuded the kind of energy and the confidence and the she basically just reminded me of the subject. And then when she put on the sound, I mean, what you guys all did together in this studio was just so powerful. And yeah, it made me more curious. And then we started talking, and then also so nice that she's in London. We live kind of close together. But it was I'll always remember you behind the mixing desk and just being so impressed, and yeah, kind of so easy to fall in love with you behind that mixing desk. I don't know. It's just, yeah.
A really lovely kind of meet cute.
Yeah.
Completely by the whims of fortune. I love it. I mean, prior to this project, how much interest did you have in the history of electronic music, Lisa?
I wouldn't say that my interest I'm not a scholar in electronic music. I'm not a musicologist, but I definitely really enjoy avant-garde and experimental music and art. So I had interest, but it wasn't something I didn't know about these women. And I think that's also why I wanted so desperately to tell their story.
And Marta, I know you mentioned just now that you actually knew of quite a few of the women in the film. And that they were personal heroes of yours. I mean, how did you come across them? Were they quite well known within electronic music already? Or was this something that you'd kind of gone out of your way to kind of discover more about?
It's interesting because both. So when I started playing around with tape machines and wanted to explore them more as instrument than just medium to record music, then people around me started telling me about, for example, Daphne Oram or Delia Derbyshire. They were the first two figures that were introduced to me kind of naturally. I felt the more I was looking into this world, the more this world was answering back to me. And every time it felt like that jolt of emotion of feeling like, wow, so I'm not alone. It's not just me having this interest and this feeling of wanting to explore tape compositions or composition were outside of the normal way of doing things. And it took, like, for example, my friend David Branch lending me a book, an individual note by Daphne Oram, where I met Daphne Oram in my timeline, and then there was Delia Derbyshire that came just after, and then I started looking more and more. And the more you look, the more you find, and that's the beauty of it. And nowadays, with the resources we have, with the internet, we can find things much easier than when I started in music. I didn't know where to look, but I happened to open a music magazine, Tape Pop, a recording magazine, and there I found Leslie Ann Jones, which is a contemporary recording engineer and producer. There was a picture, so like going back to like the power of images. There was a picture of her behind a big mixing desk, and I looked at that and I thought, I want to be like her. I want to look like her. That confidence that really came through that picture for me was really powerful, and that's what it takes, role models. And then the more you look into it, and if you really are, switched on and want to find out more, than the whole world opens up to you.
It's a real testament to the power of images, I think. Sorry, Lisa, I cut you off there.
No, I just want to say, I just want to remind audiences that this is not, the definitive history of women in electronic music. This is a small sample of, there's so many other women that I discovered while making this film that unfortunately didn't make the final cut. But we are really at the beginning of this uncovering of women working in electronic music. So I just urge people to keep your ears open, stay curious, and keep, spreading the word when you do find interesting women, because like Marta says, it's all about this word of mouth. And now the internet, I mean, we can continue to celebrate women or female authored early electronic music well beyond this film.
That's really interesting, actually, which is something I was going to pick up on. Were there any women that you were dying to include but didn't make the cut for whatever reason? And the women that did make it into the film, was there something that you were looking for in their stories which tied them all together?
Yeah, well, I guess I should start by saying just how difficult it was to really get all of this archive. I mean, it was just like years and years and years of work and millions of emails and, tracing people's lives. And so I feel like in a way, I didn't really choose the subject. The subject or the archive kind of dictated who I was really able to talk about in the film. But yeah, I mean, there's so many. I just saw a really beautiful film about Anea Lockwood. She was somebody that I spoke to, who is now doing a lot of recording of rivers. I mean, her whole output is so magical. But she was somebody that I was hoping to include, for example, also a Danish composer, Else Marie Pad. So Else Marie Pad, same generation as Eliane Redig and Daphne and Delia, but Danish. And of course, because I don't speak Danish and because I didn't have much funding and because it's just very difficult to even just to pay for the archive to be translated. So there are many, many reasons why the women are in the film are in the film. But that's just a few of why, some of them aren't.
And talk to us about how the archive was discovered. I mean, I'm just assuming that you went down a rabbit hole in the BBC archives and just came back 3 years later with all this kind of magical stuff from the history books. But what was the process of trying to find all that archive footage? Because there's so much of it, and there's quite a lot of it that I just don't think people have really seen before.
Yeah, so there's not much actually archived from the BBC just because of the financial demands of archive from the BBC. But no, I really literally had to trace people's lives. So I would look at their CVs and I would say, okay, they were in 1967, they were at this university, then I'd call that university. And then I'd figure there's a photo of this person, of one of the subjects with this person, who is that person? How can I get in touch with that person? Like private detective kind of, it was really wild. It was a wild, wild adventure. And I was literally swapping archive until the final day of the edit.
And Marta, from your perspective, how was it developing the kind of sound of the film, trying to match it to the archive that was available? Did you have in your mind a certain direction or an aesthetic or a palette that you wanted to create as the sound designer?
It was really interesting because Lisa and I were talking about how we could place the sound design in a film that is essentially about sound artists. So they don't want to be overpowering upon what the sound from all these women is already doing in the film, and that needs to be on the forefront. And the sound design also can't just be just too simple, because it wouldn't give justice to all the people featured in the film. So I think we kept it quite subtle, but quite quite purposeful to the narration, and also trying to keep it creative. So for example, we worked on the scene for when David Derbyshire was talking about the Blitz, and we did some work on that where I put in some of my composition that I did with tape and stretching out some sounds that were originally made with actual aeroplane, and put it in so that there was an element of conceptual link to it, which didn't need to be too obvious, but the sound of it also linked up to what Enya Radig will say later on in the film, or previously, where she would say that there would be this aeroplane passing over, and she would hear the music within the sound that she would experience in her everyday life. So I wanted to honor the film within the sound design, not just by providing something that will link the eye to the picture and the ears, but something which would be a bit deeper and could be, give justice to the movie and to everyone featured in it on a level that is a bit more conceptual.
That's one of my favorite segments.
Sorry, and the other thing that you really did, which is I feel you really brought a lot of the sounds to life, because you really were able to spatialize these, a lot of the archive was very flat, and you were really able to kind of give it life and really, unfortunately people at home won't be hearing the 5.1 design that we did, but hopefully people eventually will. But yeah, you were so, everything you did, the way I feel is you just really brought things to life.
Thank you. For example, we talked about this, one of the opening scenes was Susan Chani, very young, and she's performing the bukla, and if that bukla would have been a quadraphonic, then the sound effectively would have gone around the room in a circle. So what we did in the theater when we were doing the sound design and mixing it, we replicated that. So on a 5.1, 4.1 system in surround, the audience hopefully will be able to experience what it was exactly like, almost exactly like being there, because the sound instead was provided as mono. So with technology, Lisa and I were able to kind of make it sound as lifelike as it could with the archive footage too.
That's really interesting, because I was going to ask, as a sound designer working with archive, how much creative license do you give yourself to kind of bring these sounds to life while still kind of trying to remain true to the essence of the original recording?
I think if there's something that can be added that can help transmitting an emotion, such as maybe a low end power to it, something that might just make you, I don't know, it's kind of that suspension of almost disbelief when you're working with audio, when you're working with picture, because you're working with two senses that are very prominent in our everyday life. I try and be super respectful and not making it to, that kind of overtaking the image. I just want everything to work, be alongside each other. There'll be another example of when showing that during the war, the women of London, or were going to the factories and kind of taking over from. There's voiceover saying they're taking over from the jobs of their husbands, is what they're saying, and that's very unattractive. That's what the voice says in this 40s or 50s voice. And we've made to link up the scenes with the sounds that were coming in before and after. We did like a punch card, and we just added reverb, and then transition into the next scenes, and then that kind of sounds becomes part of the narrative there, and it's trying to kind of really gel together everything in a way that is a way of a composition way, rather than just serving the purpose of making the movie, the film feel full of sounds that we didn't need to add too much to it.
I mean, hearing you talk about the sound makes me wish I'd actually watched it in the cinema as opposed to casting it from my laptop onto my terrible television. But I'm sure soon audiences will get the chance to watch it in a cinema. I also just wanted to say to people watching, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I can communicate them to our panelists. We won't have a kind of regular Q&A session, but I'm happy to raise whatever questions you've got in the middle of this panel. One of the things I also loved about this film is the involvement of Laurie Anderson. Please tell me how you got her involved, because it must have been such an exciting moment when she signed on to help with the narration of the film.
Yeah, so I reached out to Laurie kind of while I was making the film, and we had a nice, we met in New York, and we had this really nice lunch, and then I knew from the beginning that I wanted her to narrate, but it wasn't something that I told her when I first met her. That came much later when I had a rough cut, when I could show her who I was as a filmmaker, because obviously this is my first feature, so it's very difficult to get people to sign up to things when you haven't really made anything yet. So yeah, it kind of happened. At the end, I just reached out again and I just told her where I was at, and I just asked if she would do the narration. And she said, "Oh, I'm really busy." And then, but let me see what it looks like. And it's, as you know, the narration's not very long. So she kind of changed her mind and agreed to do it. And I wasn't there. I wasn't, it wasn't that kind of process where we worked on it together. And it was just very much it was just very smooth. And she recorded it and she just sent it over, and that was it. And then I just had her voice in my head and just trying to figure out which is the best, iteration and how it works, which version works best. But I only had just, she'd only did a few takes, but that's all you need from Laurie Anderson. You don't need. So yeah, she didn't record it to picture or anything like that. It was just very straightforward. And I think sometimes that's the only way, to get someone of her. She's just so busy. So yeah, make it easy on people and hopefully they say yes.
Has she watched the film and given you a response yet?
I'm not sure. I don't know if, she obviously saw a lot of the film before she agreed. So, but yeah, I don't know if she's seen it with her voice. If anybody knows, please let me know.
I can't imagine the sheer pleasure of having Laurie Anderson's voice rolling around your head. Must have been an amazing opportunity as a filmmaker as well to work with someone like that, even if it was only for a short narration.
Yeah, she's definitely somebody that I always looked up to as a kid. She was just, what I love about her is that she makes this very political work, but she does it in this very disarming way. And so it's really attractive. She's able to talk about politics in an entertaining way. And that's kind of what I want to do with my life, and in a different way. But, that's kind of my goal, I guess.
And I think that comes across in Sisters with Transistors, doesn't it? Because fundamentally, women in a male-dominated industry is a political act, regardless of what industry it is. And I kept coming back to the words that the film opens with from Laurie Spiegel, who says that, electronic music particularly attracts women for certain reasons. And I wonder, do both of you kind of feel the same way that Laurie does about how the form and genre itself is particularly welcoming towards women? Marta, what do you think?
I think definitely yes, because especially back in the days, what we're talking about like 40s or earlier, the infrastructure in which music was happening was profoundly patriarchal. And so the opportunities for women, or just non-male, individual, non-male, non-white individual, were next to zero. And so I think what electronic music did is basically allowed, in this case, women to rise alongside the structures they were pre-established, and then actually established an alternative. They didn't have the same constrictions and glass ceilings that the normal way had with perhaps like record labels or recording studios that were really were full of obstacles for women. So working in electronic music, there wasn't constraint. There wasn't like didn't have the same rigid structure. Then allowed so much more creativity and diversity to flourish. In my opinion, it happens all the time. I see it a lot in society when you keep trying to smash the glass ceiling. At some point, you kind of ask yourself, you know what? I'm just gonna build alongside it, and then these new structure kind of become stronger and stronger, and then you don't need to worry about the glass ceiling anymore because that's just crashed onto itself. That's kind of how I see it, and it's revolutionary to me. It's beautiful to witness that. There's been a lot of struggles. That's what comes through as a common thread as well through the film. I think all the women here are they do share a struggle, and it's the struggle to be credited and recognized and take it seriously for the work that they do. And it's a lifelong struggle. It's still here, not just in music, in many other sectors. yes, there is this. I think that's where like solidarity and this kind of the powerful sense um, of being in it together, and what you were saying earlier, like even just the fact of being a woman in music or in any other sector is a revolutionary stance. So, we're not just doing it for ourselves, I think we're always doing it for the greater good in a way. Like, keep on going.
Lisa, what do you think?
Remind me the question. Sorry. I'm just so mesmerized by what Marta is saying. Just what was it? What was it again?
It was about how the film, opens with Laurie Spiegel's words about, electronic
Right.
music particularly attracting women. I don't know if you agree with Marta that this is definitely something that happens as a result of the kind of way that electronic music is set up and then the way you can produce it without all those kind of patriarchal overheads or obstacles.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Suzanne also says, you are the composer, you are the performer, you're the sole arbiter of your creation. So yeah, I mean, you could get music directly to your audiences. And I think for composers, traditionally you would have to get an orchestra to play your music. So yeah, it was absolutely a very liberating medium. And then I think also because it was just a genre that was very open. There is no one electronic music. There's so many, and that's what's so amazing. All these women were, making electronic music, a lot of them around the same period of time, but they all in completely idiosyncratic ways. So yeah, I think electronic music is open in more than one way.
And why do you think these women were kind of effectively written out of this history of electronic music for so long? I found it astounding that one of them, wrote the Doctor Who theme song, which is one of the biggest TV shows of the century. And, not that many people know about her.
Yeah, so, well, the history of women is a story of silence. This is like how we start the film, and it's really true. History has been generally written by white men. So, yeah, history is problematic. And I really think, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I really think it has to do with how we tell stories and our desire to, the way we tell stories is that we always have this hero, it's very action driven, and there's a hero and it's just one person who's the hero. And I think that has led to the erasure of these women. So what's fascinating to me is that these women were recognized at the time. It's just that they were eclipsed by the canon or by whoever's writing the canon.
Do you think it's also a question of, more women historians and more women documentary makers recording this kind of history? Because even if the woman is particularly celebrated during their time, it doesn't seem to guarantee the longevity of their success once they pass away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more diverse kind of population writing our history is going to create more diverse. Yeah, it's, of course, absolutely.
And do you think this kind of erasure still happens even today, or do you think we're now a little bit more alert to it happening?
I think it still happens today a lot. I even hear like younger musicians. Like I read something that Bjork wrote about, being frustrated that, whenever she puts out an album, somehow her work as a woman creator is kind of diminished. And the other collaborators, generally the men that she works with, are elevated while her contributions are diminished. So yeah, I think it's still a big problem.
Marta, do you think it's still a big problem continuing today in electronic music?
Definitely, I think so, yes. And considering the fact that electronic music has been around for a very long time, the fact that this is still a problem is problematic, because I would have hoped that by now it would have at least been a bit better, but it's just a reason for us to just keep on going and keep fighting it. Yeah, it is. It's hard to dismantle this kind of this structure as we are living within it still, because a lot of our society is still built upon patriarchal systems, and so the whole society needs kind of to change, to allow then for change to be to last. And there are some moments in history in which women finally do come to the forefront, but that needs to last forever, rather than being like a wave that then comes back from the 80s or the 70s, the feminism, and then now it kind of feels like it's rising up again, but it needs to stay up. It's not just, you know, a lot of companies might use it as a tokenism, then up until it's beneficial to the to them, then it can exist, and otherwise, when it's not beneficial, then it gets brushed under the carpet.
Yeah.
So we need a really an honest approach to it, and an approach that comes from the top. I think we still live in a society now in which the majority of CEO in every sector are still male, middle class, white people. So until that is the case, I think we're not going to have a real real inclusivity and a real reflection in society of what the diversity should be. So with the generational change, I do hope that in 20 years' time, maybe less, we really see the results of what we're hoping to achieve.
And Lisa, what do you think needs to kind of change, I guess, structurally and institutionally for, you know, this erasure to stop happening as it is still happening now? Do you think the way that, you know, the music industry is set up, or the way that we're recording this kind of history, needs to fundamentally change so that we don't lose sight of the pioneers who might be working today?
I think we just need to be, I think we just we really need to rethink storytelling and how we tell stories. And, you know, because I really think that the way that we tell stories has a massive impact. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I was just thinking about technology and, you know, where we're going. You know, this is, you know, where we were and now where we're going. And I just think, you know, I was seeing something about how most of the technology is designed by men, especially AI, which is, you know, the future. And we really need to rethink the way we tell stories, but we also need to make sure that people are included as well in the designing of the technology.
No, I think that's definitely true. And I think that, you know, we can't really try and record our own history if the instruments we're recording them with aren't designed for people like us in mind.
Yeah, even the sound, the quality of a, you know, like all the female politicians, they all shrill when they're talking through microphones because those microphones were designed for the voice of a man. So it's just so fascinating, you know, like all these female politicians always get just slammed for being, you know, whatever, shrill is the word that comes to mind, but it's just because of the way the microphone was designed. It's so sad. Like you get microphones that are designed for women's voices.
Right. So the microphones are designed to pick up like bass tones or people.
Yeah.
With
So everything in the world right now is designed in that way, you know?
I mean, when you put it into that kind of context, it's even more incredible that these women were working in a really emerging form of technology right at the very start of it, and were still able to kind of make their stamp on it. I wanted to also ask, we've only got about a minute left. Who do you think are the kind of pioneers in electronic music now, particularly for women? Because it kind of strikes me that there are so many people who are kind of continuing on the mantle of the women profiled in Sisters with Transistors. And I'd love to kind of hear about some of, you know, your personal heroes, the people who you think will be appearing in a documentary like this in 2060, assuming the world still exists by 2060. Marta, what do you think?
I do really look up to Moor Mother, for example, Jalen, Holly Herndon, in terms of you know, the future. What you were just saying, artificial intelligence, the way that she approaches it conceptually as well as practically, with how she composes, and Bjork, I really look up to her. And the way she always brings innovation in her work. I think, yes, we are, you know, we're very lucky now to be blessed by these contemporary artists that are I find really inspiring. And I think in 2060, if we're still here, we're going to be seeing films hopefully done, including them, just like this one.
And Lisa, you get to have the final word. Are there any women you think are currently carrying on the torch of the people you're profiling in Sisters with Transistors?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I don't know if I can name all of the inspiring people, but we just did a panel, and Marta and I went back and forth about this exact thing, like who would be interesting to talk to, and I absolutely agree with her. What Holly's doing with AI is so fascinating. It's really, for me, pushing technology in this new way, or using technology in this new way. But the other person I'd like to add is somebody called Modular Princess, who I discovered after making the film, when I was kind of looking into who might be interesting to hear from when we were organizing this panel with the US release. But yeah, there's so many. I'm just constantly discovering more. I also, there's just so many. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I've not heard of Modular Princess, and now I'm going to look her up. So thank you very much for that recommendation. I'm afraid, unfortunately, that's all the time we've got left today. So if you want to watch Sisters with Transistors, if you haven't already, you can head to the Barbican's website on barbican.org.uk to stream it, and for more information on how you can rent it too. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Lisa and Marta, for being such fascinating panelists. Congratulations on your work on this stunning documentary. I think it really, really is going to open a lot of people's minds.
Thank you so much.
You.
Good night, everyone.